And we can talk about patriotism and what it means. And because you've not got Captain Tom, bless him, going in his Zimmer frame into a school. Veterans are in their 30s and 40s and 50s. Their parents, right? They look like your mum and dad. And they did some extraordinary things in Afghanistan, be that medical stuff, be that intelligence, be that dog handling, be that cultural stuff that I did. And these are the stories we want to go and tell in schools to inspire children. Around leadership, resilience, patriotism, teamwork, all of that positive stuff. So it's our responsibility. No one's going to do this for us, which is why I'm so passionate about, which is why I spent a lot of time writing this into the bid, and why I'm so excited about it this year. And we're going to do it, and we're going to do it en masse, because there are 150,000 largely working age veterans from the Afghan veterans community, and that is the potential. That's the prize.
Right, just before we crack on with this episode, just a quick word about our sponsor, KS Civils and Groundworks Limited, based in Leeds. They have over 296 years of combined experience in civil engineering and groundworks, led by Director Carl Smith. Their team is known for honesty, reliability and commitment to the highest safety and quality standards. They're proudly ISO accredited and fully CHAS Elite accredited. No matter the size of your project, KS Civils and Groundworks delivers professional, trustworthy service you can rely on. To learn more, visit kscivilsandgroundworks.co.uk. Now let's dive back into this episode. Hi, welcome back to the podcast. Tonight I've got Johnny Ball. No, not the TV presenter, in case you're thinking that. Now, Johnny served combined 22 years. Firstly with the Princess of Wales Royal Regiment as on a reservist, a TA then I think it was, yeah. And then later on as an S-type, and serving with the Intelligence Corps, which I found really, really interesting when I found that out. Johnny's also competed in the Invictus Games for the UK, been involved in politics, and is now the founding member of the Afghan veterans community, which has probably taken up too much of his time, to be honest. But I think he's very proud of that, and it's a passion. Hiya, Johnny. How are you doing?
Good, mate. And that word pride, yeah, I guess it originates in my family regimental heritage, the Princess of Wales Royal Regiment, as you mentioned. And the phrase, the regimental catchphrase is fierce pride, alluding to our nickname, which is the Tigers. But also, we don't talk about pride enough, do we? And for our community in particular, the Afghanistan veterans community, that's been at the centre of something that we are keen to readdress, because there's been the nature of our withdrawal has taken a bit of dent on our pride. So really pleased that you mentioned the word proud.
I think you're right, not just because of the withdrawal from Afghan. And again, I didn't really know that much about that. I wasn't around, I wasn't serving then. But I just came across a book, the withdrawal from Kabul by... what's his name?
Lev and Geraint.
Levin and Geraint, yeah. Yes, it opened my eyes, that did. It really opened my eyes. When we sat back on, in the UK watching snippets of it on the news and not really fully understanding what was going on. And then when you find out the whole story, I mean, it's the same every time something happens with the armed forces. If you're not involved in it, people at home never get to see war happens, but that, it blew my mind. It really, really did.
And yeah, it was a difficult read.
Yeah, before we digress into that, I'm sure we'll talk about it later on. It's the same 5 questions that I ask you, that I've asked everybody who comes on the podcast, which is, where did you grow up? Why did you join? What was it like? Why did you leave? And what have you done since? So if we just start off with, where did you grow up and what made you end up where you did, really?
Yeah, I grew up I always say I grew up part in southeast London and part in Kent, because my family were London, southeast London, through and through. So my grandparents on my mother's side lived in Forest Hill, and I grew up, there were 4 of us kids, and we were a typical London overspill family. So back then in the 80s, and particularly because of the right to buy of council homes, you found lots of working class communities out in the fringes of London or out of the fringes, and Birmingham had the same as well in the Midlands. So you had these kind of overspill families that appeared in market towns and villages. So when I was growing up in Kent, in my primary school, you had a whole heap of kids that sounded like the Artful Dodger, if I'm honest, because all of our parents were Cockneys. But then there was like a community of people, with shared values, working people who just wanted to have a better life. And I'm forever indebted to my parents because they had really tough childhoods, both my mum and my dad, and they just wanted a better childhood for the four of us. And that's certainly what they gave us. So what I witnessed and grew up with was hard work. I'm from a family of builders. So as soon as I was able to, my dad would say, right, son, get in the van, and off we'd go. And I'd go out for work with my dad, and I'd witness what hard work was all about. And at home, my mum had, she was cutting old dear's hair. She ran a dancewear company from home. I mean, she sold Tupperware. I mean, whose mum didn't sell Tupperware back in the 80s? So what I witnessed was a real work ethic. And I got to witness how humans interacted by sitting on the floor in my kitchen, listening to my mum chatting away to old ladies. So, yeah, for me, I always say that I grew up part southeast London because we got kited off up there in the summertime to our grandparents. But I was really fortunate to be part of that movement for change, really, and a better life chance because of the decisions our parents made by growing up in Kent.
I mean, it's the right to buy scheme changed a lot of people's lives, really. It really did. I mean, it also might have contributed to the rise in house prices that will never, ever go away. So, swings and roundabouts.
I think so.
Yeah. Just life, though, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I think it's never that simple, is it? I mean, for me, for families like mine, what I've gone on to do, as I'm sure we will discuss in this podcast, without that, my life chances would probably be the same as my mother's siblings, for example. There's two of my mother's siblings who are not alive now when they should have been alive now, and that's down to addiction. And that's addiction from alcohol and drugs, particularly alcohol. And my mum wanted a better life for us. And my mum, bless her, is completely different from her siblings. And the life chances, I've got a cousin. I think he might actually be in Belmarsh now. And at my uncle's funeral, he had a tag on because he'd just been released from Belmarsh. Now, I realise this is quite, I'm not oversharing here because we talk about it as a family. But I think I just really want to demonstrate that you are kind of one generation from bettering yourself. And as we're going to discuss, I went on to a life of working for some senior politicians, serving my country, competing for my nation, and being a managing director of businesses and charities. Well, why hasn't my cousin had that same life chance? And that's all down to the environment, and down to things like addiction, and down to the examples they see in their parents. And I was lucky what I saw in my parents was that work ethic and just really a yearning for a better life and what they'd experienced.
It's funny you mentioned that, or not funny you mentioned, but if you think about the military side of that as well, I think the military is one of the best social mobility tools, let's call it. Like you say, you get people coming in from very, very poor backgrounds. And by the time they leave, they're a very different, very, very different people. Not everybody, but it does work for a lot of people. They go up through the ranks, they come out. Sometimes you feel like a young lad who comes in. I mean, I've just been back and seen regiment and thinking, you're so amazing, fucking hell. I was like, that happened? But it's been years ago. But there's a social climb. I wouldn't say social climb, but it's like what you say there, just the bottom, and you can change by getting better and better and better and better. And it's just an improvement in your own life. And then that helps with, your family, your kids and stuff like that. They see that. And it just progresses. And it's a reason. It's
a reason why one of the charities that I work for, the Officers Association, even though I was not an officer, though a good senior NCO, is good at telling officers what to do, right? So naturally, I ended up as the head of events at the Officers Association. But that charity was set up after the First World War because of that very factor that working class people got commissioned in the field. So when they were demobilised and came back from the Western Front, they went back. They weren't all of a sudden, Captain so-and-so. They went back to being, Tommy Atkins, back in their working class communities, even though they'd held a commission. So the Officers Association was set up to help them into employment by facilitating things like buying them, tailored suits so they could go out there and be employed, because they didn't go back to an officer life in their civilian status, the status that had acquisition through conflict. So that's been something that's been really true and linked to the armed forces, that social mobility factor. And it wasn't for me because it's my family that did all the hard work. It's my mum and dad. But certainly you and I have witnessed those kids that came from those sinker states that went on to do great things in their military career.
That's amazing. So, what got you to get involved with the military?
For me, it started with the cadets. The cadets at the age of 13, it was like an enlightenment. I was that kind of fat, chubby kid, the middle boy of three boys with an elder sister. My wonderful sister sadly passed at 45, but she was such a big influence on us, like a second mum, really. But the cadets, for me, gave me that opportunity just to be me. And not overshadowed by my brothers, because you're kind of competing for attention out of your family of four kids. But for me, it was the cadets and the confidence. That it was fun, shooting, drill. I loved drill weirdly as a kid. Friends, camaraderie, going away, living in the field, getting fit, first aid. All of those hard and human skills it gave me, and at the same time, Soldier was at its mainstream height. I think so many people I've heard speak about Soldier as an influence on them joining, but then it was storytelling. The first veteran I ever met was Mr. Webb, my school caretaker, who was a Falklands War veteran. And he had a Argentine helmet in his broom cupboard, and he was this big, gentle giant of an ex-guardsman that used to share stories. And then my grandparents. So my granddad Nobby in southeast London, he'd done national service with the Queen's Own Royal West Kents and stayed on as a regular. And then I'm later to find out my dad's dad, who I didn't get to meet, who was quite old when he had my dad. He'd served on the Western Front with the Duke of Cambridge's own, the Middlesex Regiment. And both of those regiments are antecedent regiments of the Queen's Regiment, which is the forerunner of the Princess of Wales's Royal Regiment. So there is a familial link to both grandparents having served. But certainly my granddad Nobby taught me how to polish boots when I was going through the cadets. So that phrase army barmy kind of ran through me. And at one stage, at the age of 17, I stayed on in the cadets and also joined the TA at the same time, which you weren't allowed to do. But guess what? I did it anyway.
So, never knew that. So you couldn't be a cadet and into...
No. And I was in the sixth form at a grammar school in Ashford. And again, another factor for social mobility, grammar schools. And for me, I just wanted to keep doing as much army as I could. And so I had all my mates in the cadets. And then all of a sudden, it was big boy stuff. You could... I went on exercise at the age of 17 and you're running out the back of a Chinook helicopter as an infanteer and firing, getting loads of ammunition on a TA weekend. And so for me, it was absolutely amazing at the age of 17. And I was kind of fast-tracked because I had cadet experience and went straight to Catterick almost to do my combat infantryman course. So yeah, it was amazing. So joining my county regiment that both my grandparents had served in, I was fiercely proud of that, to coin that phrase, fierce pride. And certainly a lot of people I knew joined the Princess of Wales's Royal Regiment, England's most senior infantry regiment of the line.
I never knew that either. Didn't have much to do with the infantry, really. I was in the artillery. Did you not ever think join the regulars, or...?
I did. So that was always my dream. My dream was to be an infantry platoon commander. It's still my dream at the age of 46. It's not going to happen. Newsflash. But so for me, I then did an S-type engagement to deploy to Northern Ireland. So it was almost a backdoor into the regular army. And back then, this was pre-Iraq, pre-Afghan. So the idea of mobilising reservists, it was only really if the balloon went up and the Russians came across the German planes, as if that's ever going to happen. Anyway, moving swiftly on. So for me, I had this opportunity to mobilise. I think I was one of 4 soldiers from my battalion that mobilised. I think one went off to the Tigers free fall display team to go parachuting and eating ice creams for the summer. And me and a couple of other lads went and deployed and mobilised into the 1st Battalion. So it was off to West Belfast for us for a urban tour. A 6-month tour Belfast, and also wrapped into that, I then volunteered to go back for Drumcree for the marching season. So I had a really flash to bang quick mobilisation, and it wasn't really done well back then. There was not a mobilisation centre that was like we had during Iraq and Afghanistan. It was literally tipping up at Howe Barracks with your kit, upgrading your kit, and then off you went to West Belfast. So yeah, it was pretty a shock to the system. But I had a fantastic tour. I absolutely loved it. And I was on the ground the day the Good Friday agreements were signed. So you definitely felt that there was some serious stuff at play and history was being made at that time.
How did the regulars take to you being TA? I mean, there's always the stab and this, that, and the other. And in my reality, I've never come across a bad TA soldier. I've been on tour with plenty of them. The trainer was always up to snuff. It was, I've never had a problem. I've seen a lot worse regulars, put it that way. That was probably one of them. But how did the lads treat you when you got there?
Well, funny enough, the enemy doesn't really distinguish between reserve soldiers and regulars because they just see a soldier. And that was certainly true in Afghanistan later on in my 30s, and it was true when I was 18 in West Belfast. When you go out on your first patrol, and I was bitten by a dog on my first patrol, so I made it on the NIREP, which was, everyone was very jealous because the NIREP was the casualty list that sort of got spat out on the dot matrix printer. Private Ball sustained a injury to the lower left calf from a dog bite on the turf lodge. So that was very exciting. And my magazine fell off my weapon as well. The old A1 version of the SA-80 with a magazine release catch bounced off your chest rig. So that was really fun when your rounds are all over the, I think it was on the Glen Road in West Belfast. So yeah, a bit of mentoring for my section commander, let's just say, that night. So it was a right baptism of fire. But I'll be honest with you, there was the stab connotations, but you let your soldiering do your talking, right?
Yeah.
And I grew up very quickly. I had a really good mentor in my Brit commander, my section commander, Andy Shaw. He really looked after me, and I just let my soldiering do the talking. I had a really good tour, and I just loved it. I was so keen. I just put my heart and soul and body into that. And when we got back to Canterbury, threw myself into kind of battalion life and, put your hand, never volunteer for anything, right? But yeah, I did. I went back to Drumcree for another 3 weeks. So you kind of let your soldiering do the talking. Indeed, when my S-type engagement ended, they said, you do realise you can stay on and have a career. I was like, yeah, cheers for that. I'm off to university because I've got a place at a really good university to read international politics. So that and my dream was to be commissioned. So yeah, it was hard initially. And as I sit here wearing spectacles this evening, I'm reminded of when I arrived at Fort White Rock, and one of the other sections grabbed my glasses. I think we were just about to go on patrol, or on patrol, and they drew the SA-80 sight, SUSAT sight on one lens, and then the graticals of was it the Law 80, I think, sight system on my other lens, and made me have to go out and patrol with that Lumi, kind of penned on my glasses. So, but apart from that, they were fine. You let your soldiering do the talking.
I mean, were you prepared for Northern Ireland? As like you say, it's like flash to bang, really. I did my first tour of Ireland in '88, I think it was. Did a maze tour. Really, really quiet. In all honesty, it was like an emergency tour, just guarding the maze, towers, and then up to Crumlin Road in the towers, just watching nothing. You know, it was quite I wouldn't say a non-entity of the tour, but it was really, really quiet. My second tour in '97, very different, very, very different. And we were down in South Armagh then. Lost a good friend there, Stevie Restrick.
Yes,
another one. John Cooper, through different circumstances. So it was a bit of a shit tour for us. I mean, back then, you know, it was before the times of Iraq and Afghanistan. To lose two guys on one tour, especially in the artillery, you know, we weren't that, you know, it was a bit different. It opened your eyes. I mean, I'd say the first tour didn't really make me grow up because there wasn't that much going on. Shortly after that, you know, different things happened, and that's, you know, Bosnia. That's where I think I grew up as a soldier of the tours of Bosnia. So how did you react to Ireland when you first got there? Were you ready for it?
Well, thanks for mentioning Steve Restrick's name as well, because when we did our training, you know, his sacrifice was definitely at the forefront of our training and preparation. You know, his name was in all the briefs, and I think really that grounded us about the seriousness of the task we were facing as an 18-year-old. I think for me, it kind of goes back to that Southeast London example. Even though I grew up in a very sheltered, kind of semi-rural market town, Kent childhood, in a C of E school where everyone looked the same, albeit we all sounded like Cockneys. In Southeast London, it was quite a rough area where my grandparents were, so you became a little bit more streetwise. You met people that were different to you, so the bit that you can't really prepare for until you end up in West Belfast is the poverty, is the sheer scale of that on a place that pretty much looks and, you know, feels like home geographically. But to see that, it was less of a shock to the system, because I kind of seen a bit of that growing up as a kid in London in the summer holidays. So that was kind of one thing to prepare for that. But you can't really prepare for that first time you get bricked. You know, when you're travelling along, doing top cover on top of a Land Rover APV, and you're observing your arcs, and a brick appears out of nowhere and hits you square in the face. You know, albeit you got your visor down, or you got your helmet on, but that whiplash effect, the shock, nothing can really prepare you for that, or nothing can really prepare you from the first time a kid comes up to you and spits at you or swears at you. Nothing can prepare you for that, and you become slightly hardened to that very quickly, and you have to, because there's a survival element. Because if you don't, then that resilience that you need to be able to face that repeatedly can eat away at you. So that was quite hard, but actually made me very gracious of what I have and what other people have who are more fortunate than those from those communities that were living in abject poverty, albeit, you know, the surrounding circumstances of sectarianism add another layer to that. So yeah, it was hard to prepare for, but I look at photos, and the comparison at the beginning and the end of the tour was pretty stark. And my dad, you know, grew up in poverty in Southeast London. Yeah, he said, yeah, you went there a boy, came back a man. You know, and that was my dad. He was you know, the stereotype, as you can imagine, from someone from Southeast London that works in construction. You pictured my dad, Barry. But he saw it in me, and that was the first time I'd ever heard that from my dad. That kind of acknowledgement that I was, you know, a man, and I didn't really hear that till I was 19 during that tour when I got back. So that was quite lovely to hear from him.
So when you got back, you served with the regiment or the battalion for a bit longer, and then went off to uni. Did you stay when you were at uni? Did you get involved with the TA reservists then?
Yeah, as soon as I could. And back then, because of the gay ban, the officers' training corps weren't allowed to be in the Freshers' Fair inside they had to wait outside the Freshers' Fair. Because of the gay ban that was still in place at that time in the late 90s. So they were outside in uniform, and I got recruited for the officers' training corps. And because I'd served, I kind of skipped year one and went straight into year two. And because I was completely army-barmy, every summer was spent doing paragliding in Chamonix. Every winter was skiing, Cambrian patrol, in Senny, because I went to university in Wales. I was in Sennybridge most weekends, Farm 5, Dixie's Corner, all of the joys that your listeners will be familiar with. And I was all set to go for my commission. And if you'd have said to anyone at Wales University Officers Training Corps to list those most likely to go on and have a military career, I'd probably have pumped that I was in the top 3 of people that was most keen. But I got to the regular commissions board, having been to the briefing and absolutely smashing the briefing. I actually went to the regular commissions board with flu, and I probably never should have gone. And but then, so I failed it. I piled in, and that would have been okay because I could have resat it. But the worst thing is that I failed my medical, and I got put in front of a doctor because I had psoriasis, which, funny enough, I got post the stresses of an operational tour, because it can be brought on by stress. And that was it. Bar on entry, that letter got sent to me, and I'll never forget it. And I opened that letter at home and I cried my heart out, because my dream was only to go and do regular service. So that was it. End X, no more military, having served, having been on tour. But be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, fucking hell. It's harsh though, isn't it? I mean, when you've built your life to achieve an aim, which is what you've done. You know, you poured your heart, soul, and everything into it, and then when you get there and you can't cross, you can't get over the finish line. That's guiding. That must be. I mean, you said like you sat there and you cried your eyes out. Understandable. That'd have been fucking threaders with it. Absolutely threaders.
It's quite ironic because fast forward, when I ended up working as assistant director of a team at the Ministry of Defence as a Crown servant within Defence Relationship Management in my day job, which I did for 3 years, I sat on the officer pipeline board at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst as an industry voice. So we were the linkage between the MOD and industry. And my email address was CO-DRM. So when I turned up, my nameplate said Lieutenant Colonel Ball, because they obviously thought I was a commanding officer of an MOD unit somewhere, which made me giggle. And I bumped into an older OTC friend in the car park who was serving there as permanent staff. And he was there, obviously, in uniform as a major, I think, at the time. And also the charity that I run day to day as a volunteer, the Afghanistan Veterans Community. One of my trustees, when we was recruited as a trustee, Major General Zach Stenning, was Commandant of Sandhurst, and repeatedly pats me on the back to say what a good job I do in terms of leadership. So there's somewhat an irony there, but hey ho. It was not meant to be, and I'm at peace with that.
But you were still involved with the TA while you, obviously later on we're going to talk about your foray into the intelligence corps.
Yeah,
which is quite interesting. I mean, like I say, if anyone doesn't realise, I've already listened to one of Johnny's podcasts, and I was like, okay, now I've got to get on here. Yeah, I mean,
well. Yeah,
on,
it was I was a bit of an unconventional soldier, of course, because
good plug.
Do you like that? Yeah, cheers, Colin. So in my fallow years, so that was it. Do you know what? I even got invited to go to Sandhurst to see my mates in training. Can you imagine what it was like? I mean, look back now. I was sat there in their accommodation while they were like preparing their kit on a Sunday, thinking, I want to stay. And they were moaning about what they were going through. I'm like, I'd love to be able to moan about what you're going through, but I was off to go back home to Kent. But at that stage, I was a bit lost. So in those days, unlike today with things like mental health, which I really absolutely face up to, I used to run away from my problems. So I literally ran away and went overseas and had many years skiing and snowboarding and in the Alps, in Canada. I used to spend all my summers in Spain. So I did an operational tour of Magaluf, which was fun. It's harder than West Belfast, I have to say, albeit with a bit more alcohol. But so after all of that, I was like, I'm threaders with this. Friends of mine, I had a friend from the Gunners actually called Tom Tanswell, who was killed in Iraq. I had another friend who was badly blown up, a childhood friend, a Gurkha, was badly blown up and injured in Afghanistan. And I thought, oh God, I've got to go and scratch this itch. I can't not serve. So I found another way of serving, which was politics, and applied for basically an apprenticeship, working for a member of parliament and running campaigns and running a constituency office, because I thought, well, that's a way of serving. And with that, again, be careful what you wish for, came the opportunity to serve in uniform once again.
I mean, just getting into politics at that level, again, I said earlier, we prepared for, like Northern Ireland for service and stuff like that. I know jack shit about politics. I don't like to get involved in politics. I don't like to talk about it because I wouldn't say I'm not intelligent enough, but I don't know enough. You know what I mean? I don't like to comment on stuff I don't understand. And I mean, the current, the way the world is at the moment, I'd like to say I would have classed myself just right of centre.
Yeah, I think most people do.
Yeah. Because, and I think one of the reasons I don't see that much difference between the right and the left, and I don't abide by the extreme right and the extreme left. They're just people who are fucking idiots, really, to be honest. But I don't see any massive difference in any one party in the UK at the moment, really.
I think what you've just described is exactly how everyone feels.
Yeah.
Most of us are in the middle somewhere. And also the other thing you described is that, that kind of self-analysis of not knowing much about politics. Well, I'd argue that you absolutely do, because you've seen politics in its function at the sharp end. And yes, von Clausewitz, the great strategist, said in his book on war that politics is war by other means. Was it that way round, or was it war is politics by other means? One of those two ways. But anyway, as soldiers, we absolutely execute political will. And I always say to people when it comes to politics, I call it the three the test of three. What is it that's closest to you give a shit about? It could be at the end of the street there's this pothole that's not ever been filled. What is it, like in national politics, that you really irritates you or you care about? And then the last bit is, what is it that's never gone away in your life that you've always cared about? Because we care. That's why we served. So I'd say most people are political. Party political, however, is a different thing.
Yeah.
And for me, I just say it's a vehicle. You've got to choose a team. If you want to get shit done, you have to choose a team, because it's easier to be in a team rather than an independent. Independents do get through these days a little bit, but it's hard. You need a whole machine. So I wasn't party political. I'd never been a member of a political party. In fact, when I went for the interview, I applied for the Lib Dems and the Conservatives in the same week. The Conservatives gave me an interview, this assessment centre. The Lib Dems didn't, and the rest is history. And when I went for that Conservative Party interview, I joined the party the night before, because I thought, just in case they look it up. And they asked me, I bet you've just joined them. I went, yeah, I did actually. I joined last night. I couldn't lie. So I wasn't party political. But for me, it was a vehicle. It was fascinating. I've worked for secretaries of state. I've run about 650 local election candidates, and that is absolutely leans into the wheelhouse of a military person. It's really well suited, because you're out on the streets. You've got to be streetwise. You're organising people. So think the best platoon sergeant you've ever known. That's really good for a political organiser. And also you're telling officers what to do, because I'm basically telling the MP what to do. And when an MP goes for election, it had to have my name to authorise them to stand, because I was the party's nominated officer in that constituency area. So when I worked for Grant Shapps, who went on to become Secretary of State for Defence, he was chairman of the Conservative Party when I was working for him for 3 years. He could not stand for election without my authorisation. as a party nominating officer. So you have to put in paperwork to say that as well. So that just goes to show that relationship between the platoon sergeant and the platoon commander, as it were, which was a bit like me and Grant, is really tight. So it's absolutely really well suited for the military. So I went on to talk about that for many years, and I always coined the phrase "stand up and serve again," and started a CIC in order to facilitate some of those conversations. So we're starting to see veterans show up in politics more across all three main parties now, not really in the Green Party, and certainly they're popping up in Reform as well. So that's really good, the balance of talent. But for me, I had a fascinating time. I've worked in London, Northamptonshire, I worked in Hertfordshire in politics, and that's how I met my wife. She worked in the European Parliament, she worked in Parliament, and also in the constituency. And we now have a family and married as a result of meeting through the oldest dating game in town, which is party politics. That's how we met.
I mean, you mentioned about you were working in the MOD. I take it that wasn't because you were working as the Conservatives. That was another stint.
Yeah, that was after. Basically, I got a bit threaders with party politics.
Yeah.
I was a bit tired of it. So, and at the same time, alluding back to the military, the intelligence corps, I went knocking on the door of my local Ink Corps unit and declared that I had psoriasis, and it hadn't been flared up for years, and because it had been clear for about 6 years or something, they were like, "Oh, the rules have changed. You're back in," and all of a sudden you're at Purbright. And I got best recruit. I found my report today actually, funny, because I'm sorting through loads of crap, having a bit of a tidy up, and I was just one shot away from being the best shot as well, and I got my marksman on that Purbright. So, but I realised how soft I'd got. I needed to go back to basic training, so I'd kind of softened up a bit from all that time in Magaluf and the French Alps. So, whilst I was serving in politics, I then re-enlisted when I was working in London, and I went on to serve for another 16 years in the Intelligence Corps and doing full-time reserve service in that as well. But after getting back from Afghanistan, I then went back into politics, and then I discovered this thing called the Armed Forces Covenant, and I discovered the team that ran it down as a part of MOD. I thought, oh, that looks interesting, which then meant I left politics once and for all, and ended up joining and was the Assistant Director of Defence Relationship Management, which looks after all of the Armed Forces Covenant signatories, the Employer Recognition Scheme of the Bronze, Silver and Gold Award, and looks after big strategic relationships with some of the largest employers. And our mission was to make organisations forces friendly, to facilitate mobilisation of reservists. That was a real core mission, because we were still in Afghanistan at that stage, and it was still looking like whole society conflicts and mobilisation of reservists.
I think you said the words the Armed Forces Covenant. Unfortunately, I think most veterans would poo-poo them words, basically, because they don't feel it does anything. There's many companies out there that kind of just sign up for it just because they can. I'm not saying they all do, and I'm not saying it doesn't work, but my experience and the people I've spoke to kind of see it another way, if you know what I mean.
I think that's okay, though.
Yeah.
Because they don't have to do it. And for us, if people sign it, so my small little family business that's still going today, my dad started 4 decades ago, signed it. We haven't got an influx of veterans working for our family business. We've hired sons of Gurkhas. We've got a lot of Gurkhas where I grew up. And we've engaged with the local reserve unit a lot, my family business down in Kent. But on paper, people that might be critical might throw stones at my family business. Was actually culturally, and they're huge supporters. And if they're going to put the covenant on their branding and their socials, that's free advertising. So I'm okay with that. The majority of organisations, particularly when they go on for the bronze, silver and gold, I mean, to get the gold award and then get it revalidated, because you have to get revalidated, it's quite a high bar. You have to fundamentally change HR policies. Now, for any of these people that might be critical of it, I don't know if you've ever worked for an organisation as a worker bee and try to engage with your head of HR to go and make the case that your reservist colleague should have an extra 2 weeks leave, because that's the standard that you need to get to gold. Now, people do this on the side of their desks. They don't get paid for it.
Yeah.
And that's under the auspices of the Armed Forces Covenant. So without the Covenant, none of that would exist. Without the Covenant, we would not have had the influx of reservists recruited. Without the Covenant, we would potentially not be ready for a whole societal conflict, which is what we're staring down the nose of a barrel at. So when it comes to local authority, however, in the Covenant, that's where I'm a bit more hardline. Because that's where we're talking about disadvantage, because people have been away from their area because of service. And if a local authority doesn't have the chutzpah to get people and understand people that have served back into their communities and treat them like anyone else and put them at the back of the housing list, then we've got a problem. Or if you had medical issues because of the result of your service and the NHS view you differently, it's not your fault. You're disadvantaged. So when it comes to, and there's legislation now, it's enshrined in law in terms of statutory public authorities delivering services, and that's where it should be. But for corporates, let's not bash them about. If they're doing poor behaviour, then invariably there's going to be an armed forces network. You go and talk to a Europos, and make the change. But the majority of employers are doing good things under the Covenant. And without it, culturally, we'd probably still be very British and dealing with quite a niche community in the shadows.
Yeah, fair point. So let's go back a bit then on the intelligence corps. Why the intelligence corps?
Oh, I like the uniform. No, so it was geographically close to where I was working in North London, and I thought I found a leaflet. I looked at the leaflet and I saw for me, because me being a commissioned officer was not the dream I wasn't about to achieve. And actually, I did apply, go knock on the door of my local infantry unit when I was in Northamptonshire, which was the Royal Anglians. And they didn't follow me up. I went inside the TA centre, spoke to the recruiting corporal, and they didn't follow me up. So I thought that was that. So second go was the Ink Corps, and they did follow me up. So they pulled me in for an open evening, and they did a really good job of explaining, and I'll be honest with you, slightly sexing up, because you're not all going to become James Bond, by the way, if you're going to join the Ink Corps. Far from it. You're going to do a lot of colouring in of maps and a lot of briefing, and a lot of time behind computers for some people. Though what I was explained were the different parts of the intelligence corps: human intelligence, languages, operational intelligence, open source intelligence, all of these different aspects of intelligence. It seemed so fascinating, and it saw me. I knew I had the foundations of soldering, so I could kind of brush up on my skills, and as I said, I was a bit soft, but actually I could learn something new, analysis, and I found that fascinating because I was going to learn a new skill. And for me, because Afghanistan was everywhere, so I rejoined in, when was it, 2006, 2007, I think it was 2007, around about then. Then for me, it was Afghan, and I was kind of fascinated by languages. Someone came and did a presentation about learning Arabic and chasing after pirates with the Royal Marines. I thought that looked good, so I put in for the language course. Got Pashto, which is a Afghan language, and there's only one place you're going to go with that course, which was Helmand Province. Which is after a 15-month course learning the language, is where I ended up in 2011.
That must have been really tough, to be honest. I mean, I can only just speak English. I'm from the northeast. It was super tough, and one of the reasons it's tough is because the language itself wasn't codified. So you can't go to a university like you can go to any university and learn Arabic, because it's properly standardised, and there's different parts of Arabic, but the course that they were teaching at the Defence School of Languages was the Arabic course translated verbatim into Pashto, and it was translated by people that were, the Afghan and Pakistani Pashtun diaspora that are living in this country. So there's certain words in Arabic that are nicked or borrowed by Pashtuns,
but there are certain words that just don't exist in Pashto because no one's ever written the language course. You're talking about a nation that's 90% illiterate. So it lacks education, therefore it lacks standardization and academic rigor. So for them to teach us it, we were being taught by refugees in Beaconsfield, leafy, beautiful Beaconsfield, which was amazing. It was a real challenge, and we were learning stuff, language and modules that you never go near when you're in Helmand, because in Helmand all you're talking about are the Taliban, crops, farming, families, security, and geography. Which we didn't really learn much about, if I'm honest. So we wasted a lot of time. So that was kind of blind leading the blind.
I've heard you talk about this on a previous podcast, and it kind of backfired for you in a way, because you were getting taught, let's say, pronounced English type of thing. That's like I've just alluded to there. And then when you got out there and you speak to people, like, "Fuck, you talking about?"
Yeah. But I guess part of it was the novelty, right? So you're talking medieval kind of geography. Yeah, people living in mud-walled buildings, people living in the same clothes, no running water, water supplied by wells, electricity provided by solar panels. You're talking a society that is centuries behind ours, technology and culturally, 90% illiteracy. So when this white bloke tips up with a very slightly dodgy moustache and starts attempting to speak their language, do you know what? They were amazed. I was like an astronaut had landed on a different planet, and what that did was what you just done. You started laughing. That's what they did. So you'd start to build relationships with people, and you'd completely cock up. I was basically speaking BBC Pashto, and quite limited versions of it, whereas what they were speaking as a Helmandi farmer with no teeth was like Glaswegian. Imagine speaking to a Glaswegian without any teeth. That was essentially, in no offence, Glaswegians with no teeth, but that's essentially what a Helmandi farmer was sounding like to me, and what I was sounding like to him was a very well-spoken, standardised person using words that they didn't understand because they weren't in their Helmandi vocabulary. So I went around with this notebook and just asked what things were, pointed to things and wrote it down, and just threw myself in it. Went out on patrol a lot with the infantry. Into villages, speaking to young kids a lot because they were quite inquisitive, and you build relationships with those and make the place safer, really. Yeah. So I had a bit of an effect, and by the end of the tour, I was actually quite good. But certainly at language school, I was absolutely toilet and failed a lot of exams because it just didn't really suit me. I found it really tough. But actually on the ground, I became quite effective as an operator.
I mean, one thing I'd ask about... I put myself up in the bracket of being lucky that I never served in Afghan. I was too fat and too medically downgraded to go. Thank God, to be honest. Out there, it affects you. Any two like that, they've been to Iraq and stuff like that. And you're right, it is like they're behind the times, let's say. How did it affect you? Knowing these people and how they lived like that?
I think it affects me in both good and bad ways. I think, first of all, let's deal with the bad. I flew out to my tour, got on the flight line and waved goodbye to squadron leader Ant Downing, one of my classmates, and that was the last time I ever saw him. And Ant was killed that tour. So that was bad. We lost Matt Thornton as well in our patrol base. From the now Royal Yorkshire Regiment. So yeah, that's the bad, right? And then when I got back, I then did the repatriation of an Inc Corps soldier, Lance Corporal Ollie Thomas, who was a reservist, mobilised, and funny enough, worked in politics like me. So we had a lot in common, and I knew Ollie, and then carried him off the back of that aircraft that day. So that's the bad. Young people at the prime of their life.
Yeah.
But the good is certainly your appreciation of what we have, your appreciation of your family, the very simplistic things you have in life. When you see what people don't have, when you see abject poverty on that scale, when you see the result of terror and intimidation and violence on families and ordinary people, because it was a civilian human terrain caught up in conflict. You're fighting around civilian populations, and the legacy of that is left for decades and centuries in Afghan culture, in fact. So all they've ever known is war. So that therefore has an effect on you from what you see and what you hear. And then there's this weird backdrop in that Afghanistan is beautiful. So you have this beauty and a culture that is, when you go to a tribal village, they want to give you stuff. You sit down for tea. They have very little, but they want to give you stuff. But at the same time, they do like to tell a story, do Afghans, and sometimes prone to exaggeration. So yeah, it did affect me. But some of the highlights, of our work, I'm very proud of our work. Rebuilding a school. I've got wonderful photos. Reading out school children's letters from English school children to these Afghan kids in this mud-walled school. That was fascinating. Spending time with infantry soldiers, young lads living in a remote checkpoint with 14 blokes. You become this little community and you look after each other. It was a real privilege of this generation. I feel really proud that I'm part of 150,000 people that served in Afghanistan, men and women, from all three services, that gave the best that we could possibly give under the most tragic of circumstances. So that's a real privilege to be part of that history, even though some of it is etched in pain too.
I mean, whether rightly or wrongly we were there, that's by the by. I mean, if we put it in comparison with Iraq, Iraq, we shouldn't have been there. Really, I did up Telic 2003 with 3 Hour Chair, and very, very proud of that. I say that a lot on this podcast. I'm proud that we went to war and we did our best and we won, and then we should have left. We should have went, right, he's down, sort your own country out. We've got rid of him for you. We'll fuck off instead of trying to nation build, which is what we did, or what the Americans tried to do, and we didn't have a plan. I think. And again, I didn't know that much about Afghanistan until I read the book that we spoke about earlier. And it opened my eyes. And the one bit in the book that really did open my eyes was like, the Taliban weren't terrorists. I'm not saying they're the nicest people in the world, but they weren't terrorists, and they're still not on the terrorist watch list either. And for us to say, right, give us Bin Laden. I want him now, and him going, no, because he's our guest. If I give him away to you, I wouldn't be a proper, Muslim, and it's against our beliefs. And was that the basis of the fucking war? Probably a little bit more than that, but not far off. Did we make a difference in Afghanistan? I think while we were there, we did, and things were changing. And then again, I spoke to people about that, and they said, yeah, it changed in the big cities and the big towns. But out in the Ulu, where everybody else lives, didn't make a fucking anything different, and it just feels, it leaves a bitter taste in, I think, a lot of people's mouths, as you mentioned earlier about how we left it, how it was almost fucking ran away overnight, thanks to Big Brother just saying, we're fucking off now. How do you feel about Afghan that one?
It's a big question, and it's a question that I've sought to answer by actually setting up the Afghanistan veterans community, because it's not just mine to answer.
Yeah.
It's the communities, and I think we're reconciling. I mean, when Op Pitting happened, and you've alluded to Escape from Kabul, written by Levison Wood and Geraint, that book was a painful read. And at that time, I was going through therapy as a result of trauma, not from Afghanistan, but from Harley Davidsons, being knocked off of them.
We'll get on to that.
But it's I was in a bad way. I guess you call it the moral component. moral injury.
Yeah.
It wasn't great. But for me, arguably, Afghans have got long memories. Their culture, which is particularly Pashtuns, and there are lots of different ethnic denominations within Afghanistan, but the majority Pashtun culture, and all Taliban are Pashtun, but not all Pashtuns are Taliban, is they have long memories. So there's a tenet of Pashtunwali called Badal, which means revenge, which means debt for a wrong is passed on to your children and your children's children, etc., etc. So when we were there, you had Afghans talking about the last time they kicked the British arse at the Second Afghan War, at the Battle of Maiwand, which was in the late 19th century. So that's passed on to generations. And for us, so therefore the flip side of that is that we gave a lot of people hope in terms of education. So those girls that were educated in school, and I guess, campaigners like Malala, who's a Pashtun from Pakistan, who was shot by the Taliban, that's, you can't take that away.
Yeah.
And I was in very rural Helmand province, and I rebuilt a school and saw it reopen and saw children being educated, albeit in different ways than what we would expect education, but they'd had a glimpse of education and hope. So I'm very proud of that, and certainly the infrastructure. The infrastructure in Afghanistan was put down by the Americans in the 1950s, and they're just used to war. They're used to people coming and going. You've now got incursions by the Chinese, by ISIS, by two different factions of the Taliban. So it is a battleground, and it always will be, based on tribal dynamics. It's a very complex environment, but I'm really proud of the little speck of dust in the Afghan history how we operated, and I think for me we absolutely need to have a diplomatic presence in Afghanistan. We've got some embassies in some pretty despicable countries across the globe where we hold a diplomatic presence, but we don't have one in Afghanistan. The reality is the Taliban are ruling Afghanistan. That's very uncomfortable for people like me to hear, or colleagues of mine. We started this conversation mentioning those names that we've lost. That's really difficult for families to hear. But the reality is they are in power. That's not going to change. We left, and I think by having a voice in country through diplomacy, that's where we need to get to. And I don't think we should have left. I think we achieved quite a lot before we started fighting kinetically. We achieved quite a lot in the early stages using smaller teams and across a widely dispersed, and arguably the operation after Herrick was small teams achieving quite a lot too. And indeed, doctrinally, we saw the introduction of the Rangers introduced to the British Army with small training team concepts across the globe. So we're almost geared up for that. And then we took away their air power. What unfolded after that was a complete capitulation of the Afghan security forces very quickly, quicker than anyone can imagine. So, yeah, that answer's a long one for you because it's deliberate, because it is a complex one. I don't have a single regret that. No, waste of time. It's because it's not that simple.
No,
it really isn't. And I just live in hope that one day I'd love to go back to Afghanistan. I really would.
I agree that we should have some of the embassy out there. Like you say, the Taliban are in charge now. They're not going to go away. There's nobody going to overthrow them. They're in charge. So, do we just banish them? Like it seems that we have done at the moment. But we should reach out to them. There's many people out there still who are entitled to come back and live here. Now, a lot of people might not like that. The way the country is at the moment with all the, the boats, this, that, and there's too many, and there's this, that. Fuck off. Doesn't matter. Right? Plenty of room. There's plenty of people out there who deserve to be here because of what they did while they helped us, whether it be translators, whether it be fucking bottle washers, whatever. They knew that when they come to help us and work for us while we were there, they were putting their lives at risk. All right, some people just did it for money, and I imagine 95% of them did, but they all knew that they'd be in danger. And there's people out there, young girls, young boys, families that need to get out of that country still. And again, it wasn't until the escape from Kabul, it just fucking blew my mind. It really did. It really, really did. And
Yeah.
they need to be here. But if we haven't got a link,
absolutely,
if we haven't got a link in the country, we're just people are going to die, and they always are. They already are, and we'll keep dying because we haven't done enough to, facilitate that journey for them to get here. Or
that's a really compelling argument. It's a really compelling argument to have a diplomatic presence in Afghanistan, because I've had on LinkedIn, bizarrely, and an email, I've had people sending me pictures of their dead relatives that had served in the Afghan security forces, pleading for me to help. I've had that, and I get contacted by Afghans all the time who'd served, and they list their units, their credentials, and who they served with, and the naming regiments that you and I will know and love. And I can do absolutely sweet FA apart from send them official guidance, which they're already plugged into. They're that desperate. But until you have held the hand of an Afghan, like I have, who weeks later we then find out was murdered by the Taliban, because he spoke to us, I don't know, but he was a caretaker of a school that we used to visit a lot, and you find out about that, until you then hear a story of a head teacher of a school whose son was found headless in the River Helmand. These are really graphic depictions of two of what I know.
Yeah.
Right? There are dozens, hundreds of stories, and the intimidation and violence, the kind of intimidation and violence we used to see on our own streets in Northern Ireland, where we cut our teeth. Perhaps not in extremis as I've just described there, but the notion of intimidating your own people was certainly there.
Yeah.
Look at the disappeared as an example of what the IRA did, and indeed the loyalists did too to their own people. So, intimidation and violence comes with this form of conflict, and for the other layer is that Pashtunwali, revenge will be passed on. And I just think of many people that I've worked with, Afghan Terps, not knowing where they are, what's happened to them, are they dead, are their families dead, because that's the way of the world. And you're right, it's unfortunately it's been wrapped up into the immigration debate with all of the other, with chancers and with people that wish to do us harm, but genuine bona fide refugees seeking asylum have been wrapped into that whole debate, and it's our responsibility for those of us that know to actually explain to people, and that could be down your pub to your family, that actually there is a subset of that absolutely are entitled to be here.
Most definitely. I mean, it just beggars belief, really. I mean, it's the same. Christ, I mean, it's as old as conflict, I suppose. There's Vietnam was the same. They didn't get, the people out there. Iraq, more or less the same. As people left there that had probably been, were in danger because they'd worked for the British Army or Americans or whoever nationality they worked for. I mean, Iraq's a very different thing, obviously. It's kind of finding its feet now. I mean, it should have thought, that should have happened years ago. We should have left earlier. Or we should have facilitated things, and everything should have been done in a different way. And it's becoming more and more of a stabilised country nowadays. I was talking to a reporter the other week who spent a lot of time there. And he said it's a really different place now. If you go back, they're very different. I don't think Afghan will change at all, really. Not under the Taliban. As Bill Bailey once said in one of his comedy shows, the Taliban, the greatest minds of the 14th century. They need to, which I find really bizarre, because they preach all this stuff, but they're all walking around with mobile phones and stuff like that. And I suppose that's a bit naive on my part, understanding their religion, their politics, and I don't really want to in the end of it. I just want there's a lot of veterans will probably say, they just want peace now. We've done our time, and I don't want to see any more fucking war, any more people dying. There's no point. It's just a waste. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're right. It's a country that's been ravaged by war for so long. And of course, where you leave a gap, others fill it. So the Chinese are absolutely taking advantage. I mean, they border the Wakhan corridor in the northeast of the country, borders China. So you've now got them taking advantage of that situation and seeking mineral extractions. The situation in Iran, I think it's the Helmand River actually initially starts in Iran, its source. So water security, we know, is an issue now in the globe. So cut off water supply to the Helmand. That's the breadbasket of Afghanistan. You starve a nation. Yeah. And look at what's happening in Iran. And persecuted ethnic parts of Afghanistan. So the Hazaras are persecuted by the Taliban. They are ethnically aligned to Iranians in terms of Islam and race. So there's so many dynamics around that part of Asia as it borders the Middle East that are very, very complex. And of course, in 1896, I think we created, put a line called the Durand Line, because that was the name of the British official. Put a line between the largely Pashtun ethnic land, which separated Afghanistan from Pakistan and segregated an ethnically aligned people, the Pashtuns. So, hey, good old us, eh?
Yeah. I've had this conversation many times on this podcast. Let's look at the Middle East. Who caused that? We did. Okay. How did we do that? Because we're twats. Nah, no, really. In the end, it's trying to do. Look at India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and all that. Did we cause that? Did we do this? Did we do that? Probably. We've caused more ill, but then again, we've done some really good things in the world.
We have done good things. Yeah, absolutely.
People forget that. The bash us and blame us for everything, but most of the world wouldn't be speaking English if we were that bad.
Yeah,
that's a bit extreme. I don't know. Well, you about China there. I mean, they're taking over the world now anyway, just in a different way. They rock up to a company and go, "Do you want a new motorway? I'll knock you a bridge up there. Want a block of flats there? Don't worry, we'll sort that out." In we go. And they're doing it all over Africa, and it's just a fucking better way of doing it. It's cheaper in the end, isn't it? Saves lives, I suppose, but it's just nation building in a different way, and they're doing it. They're doing it on the quiet, and I don't think many people realise how good they are at it and how much they have taken over. During the 60s and 70s, there was proxy wars in Africa, between America and Russia. The likes of Angola, Democratic Republic, stuff like that. Very interesting period of time to watch the two factions fighting that weren't even there. Bringing all in the mercenaries into Angola and it's fascinating. It really is. And then it kind of happened again, almost years later, where we're fighting in Afghanistan, and it's outside countries aren't getting involved. It's more of a religion thing type of thing. I don't know if I'm understanding it right. It's just that's the way I get to it. I don't think there's any real great answer. It's just a shame that nothing peaceful could be found over there. Really, I mean that leads me on now to you've left the intelligence corps, and we spoke a bit earlier about the Invictus Games. How did that come about?
Invictus, probably off the back of the Afghan generation, right?
Yeah.
So our nation and our allies suffered some of the most horrific, life-changing injuries as a result of our experiences in Afghanistan. And with that came a new approach to recovery and rehabilitation, and sport as a vehicle for change, and the inspiration of what Prince Harry saw at the Warrior Games in the States gave birth to the Invictus movement. Now, I've benefited from that personally as a result of not only the technology of limb-saving operations from the battlefield. Indeed, my own limb was saved after 7 surgeries because I had a D-glove injury here at home by a surgeon that had carried out 32 operations on lads back from Afghanistan. And when you consider there were 664 life-changing injuries in Afghanistan, from a statistic I found, that's a fair old chunk of them, and I'm thankful, a bit like in the Second World War, how burns victims were, the ability to recover from that for the experiences of the pilots during Second World War, and the Guinea Pig Club was formed, and we've seen iterations of that now from this generation. So Invictus was really given birth by our experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan, and it's now part of the mainstream as part of a recovery offer. Indeed, Team UK is managed by the Royal British Legion. And for me, I was really in a bad place, and I was going through mental health recovery, or support, not recovery, because I was nowhere near recovery, but through private health provision from my motorcycle accident. And I was losing a sense of identity. I was still serving as an instructor, funny enough, at Chicksands as a reservist in a regular unit. So I was still getting bits of work, and could, I was hobbling around with crutches and one boot at one stage, still able to teach in the classroom. And that was the only work I had, was teaching courses. So I was really struggling with identity. I was putting on weight because obviously I wasn't moving, I wasn't able to do any sport, wasn't able to play rugby. And I was told by my surgeons everything I would not be able to do. Would not be able to, I'd have a limp, I would not be able to snowboard, I would not be able to play sport, I would not be able to do so many things. What Invictus showed me was the opposite. It showed me everything I could potentially do. Because you were seeing Mark Ormrod, who I know has been on your show, chucking himself in a swimming pool at the games and just achieving phenomenal things. When you see that, you can't help but be inspired. Then I had friends that had done it as well, so I'd ring them up and say, is this thing for me? And for me, the key moment came when an open day was put on in Nottingham, and I went up there with my wife, my miniature schnauzer, and my newborn baby, and had a poke around at this Invictus malarkey, spoke to people who had done it, they shared their stories, and I thought, well, I'll put my hat in the ring. And when you apply, you go on these kind of selection weekends, so they can have a look at you can look at them, try sports, and your application form, you just put your why down from the heart. And I was selected. I was the only serving reservist in the team. I was the first ever Inc. Corps reservist to have done the Invictus Games, and I was one of a team of 59 extraordinary people. And you soon realise that it's not a competition of who's the poorest. There are cancer survivors, there are people with mental health injury, there are amputees, yes, of course there are, and there are people like me that have a long-term health condition, which is arthritis. I have to inject myself every 2 weeks. I have a double lower limb impairment as a result of that motorcycle accident, and I have a mental health injury too. So you realise it's not a competition of who's the poorest, you're all the same. And the community it gives you, and I speak to someone from Invictus pretty much every day. I'm seeing someone from Invictus tomorrow, and they are my family. They really are. We're so tight, and it just gives you another opportunity. So I feel very fortunate to have been selected in 2023 for the games. I captained the indoor rowing team, a team of Vomit Comet riders. I used to hate that thing, but now I absolutely love the indoor rower. I got a medal in powerlifting, and to have the opportunity to have the Union flag on your chest again, whilst you've got the flag over your shoulders, and getting a medal presented to you by a VC holder from New Zealand, Willie Appiata, who got the VC in Afghanistan, was pretty phenomenal. And I got back on two wheels again by cycling, which now means every morning I cycle to school with my little girl, and that is what Invictus gave me.
It sounds amazing. It really does. And I've spoken to other people who've been involved in the Invictus Games. And you're right. One thing that, as an outsider, one thing I expected everyone, who was going for the Invictus Games, they were either going to be limbless or massive injuries or this, and it's not. It's the same as, it's any Paralympics or anything like that. There's varying degrees of disability, whether some of them are unseen, or some are quite obvious, but it gives people the ability to push themselves, to better themselves. Like you said there, be part of something bigger, be part of a club, and find a purpose in life for some people. That's the main thing that it gives as well.
I think without it, I'd be limping permanently. I might be dead as a result of my mental health injury. I might be. It gave me back, and the network it's given me, the support it's given me, how it's enhanced my relationship with my family and my wife. It's given me all of that, and it's not just about the week games. It's about the ripple effects outside your life. So sport is a habitual part of me now. I'm probably fitter now than when I was serving, rather ironically. It's made me, I feel like I'm in the second season of life now.
That's a good way to say it. I like that, yeah.
Yeah, because it's given me this confidence. I'm still me, when you're deeply rooted in a working class kind of background, you're never going to get too above your station. But I've gone on to, co-found a national charity, which has a former chief of general staff as its patron. I've formed all the governance around that and helped build it from scratch. I've run a programme on behalf of the Office for Veterans Affairs within industry as a managing director of a charity, started my own business. I've, competed for my country. I've started a family. All of that is beneficial for society. And I don't know how many cadet units I've visited and schools and guide units to talk about Invictus. So maybe, just maybe, you change some perceptions along the way about not only what it means to be either disabled or have long-term health conditions, but also what it means to be a soldier, and preconceptions, because there aren't that many of us about, right? Because we're a small army, small armed forces. So as you go about your way, we're a walking, talking part of our brand. So I'm really proud of that, and all the media stuff you end up doing. So changing perceptions along the way, I'm really proud of that too. And that's everything that experience gave me. And I will forever be an ambassador for it. And I'm very excited that it comes to Birmingham next year, in July next year, because the whole nation can go and see it. The whole nation can feel the magic of what it gives you and what it gives to not only the armed forces community, but wider society too.
Something you just said there kind of resonated with me about being an ambassador for being in uniform, showing the military out there, I think the general public has forgot we're there again, type of thing. We loads of respect for the armed forces during Afghan, watching the repatriation of many a soldier coming through, Roll Up Bassett, stuff like that. I'd be sat at home watching that. I'd be fucking in tears every time it happened. And then all of a sudden, not in the news anymore, but forgot about again until the fucking next time. Sort of going into schools and stuff like that, where I think, especially modern day life, really, we're kind of, I wouldn't say shunned, but it's not. Schools don't really say, "Come on, let's." But again, a lot of schools have got ACF units in as well. And the first time I seen that, I was driving along out the town where I live, and I seen like 3 or 4 kids walking down the road in uniform, and I was like, "Oh, yeah." I didn't realise, I didn't even know they did that. They'd turn up once a day at school in uniform and work that way. I mean, going into schools, and have you been I wouldn't say fondly received, but well received.
Yeah. And so I did it first through a charity called Inspiring Futures, where I went in and delivered a skill to secondary school children. So I went in uniform and taught them military intelligence analysis skills, some analytical techniques, and we're doing it this year. So the Afghan Veterans Community, as a service charity, are one of Boeing, one of their 11 community partners this year. And we're running a pilot to train 12 veterans as storytellers to go into schools. Now, this is actually in page 14 of the government's own veteran strategy. I am that much of a geek. I know what page it is. And we're responding to that, and we're training using a great organisation called the Drive Project, who have trained veteran storytellers through Blesma, the Nimbus Veterans Charity. So they've spoken to about 180,000 school children through that intervention, a project called Making Generation R. Look it up, it's phenomenal. So we're replicating some of those lessons, applying it to Afghan veterans that aren't just injured, they're just everyday people like me and you. We're training to go into schools. And if we get this right, the prize is this, that we can go to government with the results of that, having tested the efficacy, the impact on schools and children, and we can talk about patriotism, what it means. Because you've not got Captain Tom, bless him, going in his Zimmer frame into a school. Veterans are in their 30s and 40s and 50s. Their parents, right? They look like your mum and dad. And they did some extraordinary things in Afghanistan, be that medical stuff, be that intelligence, be that dog handling, be that cultural stuff that I did. And these are the stories we want to go and tell in schools to inspire children around leadership, resilience, patriotism, teamwork, all of that positive stuff. So it's our responsibility. No one's going to do this for us, which is why I'm so passionate about it, which is why I spent a lot of time writing this into the bid, and why I'm so excited about it this year. And we're going to do it, and we're going to do it en masse, because there are 150,000 largely working age veterans from the Afghan veterans community, and that is the potential. That's the prize. But we just need to get on and do it. But at the same time, us as veterans, we've got to be really careful with our brand. And what I mean by that is that when we go online and we perpetuate, let's just say, I don't know, Russian-sourced propaganda that seeks to divide our nation, because a lot of this is from overseas on bots, bot farms and other nefarious actors, then we've just got to be really careful when we share stuff or when we comment, be that on Facebook or LinkedIn, that it doesn't damage our brand. Because if they see us as a bunch of miserable, entitled, victim, woe is me, downplaying our skills, because we've got a lot of skills, then what employer would want to hire us? If we're constantly bashing service charities, and that doesn't mean we can't challenge them. Absolutely we can. We can always do things better, and I'm a big fan of collaboration and reconciling certain charities. It can always be better. But people weigh too much in attacking all the time, and they're watching. Because the generation before us, Captain Tom's generation, handled themselves with huge dignity. And we don't want to be that generation of veterans that's seen as the entitled class. Far from it. I'm not a victim. There's loads of bad stuff's happened to me. I want to be valued. I want to be valued by society. So we've got to take personal responsibility about our brand, because we are walking, talking, including this podcast now, and I'm choosing my words carefully. We are walking, talking ambassadors for not only our regimental and corps backgrounds and our service, but for the whole veterans population. And we've got loads to be proud about. We've got a whole heap of skills and experiences that are huge use as a national strategic asset in this country. So that'll get us in schools. So you've alluded to the fact it can be a challenge to get into some of these schools. So let's not make it more of a challenge by painting ourselves in a bad way, in the way in which we behave, either in our communities or online, and take a bit of personal responsibility, because we've got a great story to tell.
I mean, that goes back to what I was saying earlier about politics and me not understanding the rights, or really having, to be honest, much interest in it in reality. But you do see that a lot of people get their political leanings now from social media. You know, whether that's right or wrong, it isn't right. It's got to be wrong. You know, but like you say, a lot of stuff that's out there online, TikTok, Facebook, stuff like that. You don't know if it's genuine. You know, I've dealt a lot recently with AI, and it can be quite convincing in reality. And a lot of people are just on a bandwagon, carry on, and like you say, they're posting stuff just because, and it is damaging in reality. And we've got to be more mindful of what we post online, what we say to each other in public. You know, in private, it's a very different thing. You keep them opinions to yourselves. But I mean, you're about there with let's say, the old Ivans coming in and giving bad intelligence type of thing. One thing I found interesting after the invasion of Ukraine, and this is a complete different change of subject, but going back on to something you'd probably be able to explain a bit better, was, you know, everyone was clamouring to, oh, what's happening, what's going on. You know, the first few months I was glued to, you know, open source maps.
Oh yeah.
And stuff like UK Live Map, and you know, you go on that one, and it's phenomenal. You know, it's got every different part of the world, and the intelligence you can gather from just that, you know, and it's fed by Twitter feeds and other social media, you know, getting fed into it, and you can find out more there quicker than you can most news agencies. I'd imagine, without saying too much and giving away your spycraft or anything like that, with intelligence called people, you know, the open source intelligence community out there is rapidly grown over the last few years, and it's phenomenal. You know, there's rafts and rafts of information to be sourced through and you can get hold of. I don't think people realise.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, without saying too much, I did do a bit of work on the analysis of Russian sentiment online. And so when I see stuff now in the mainstream, and it might look like and sound like a British thing, and then you see the impact on that, and then you see it elsewhere, somewhere else, and you're like, yeah, I know where that's come from. So I think we've got to be really curious. And now we've obviously got AI, and you now have the kind of the physical evidence before your very eyes. Yeah. I mean, you know, think about your elderly relatives when they go online and they find things absolutely mind-blowing. If you show them one of those videos, if you show a slightly agitated person in their 70s or 80s one of those AI videos, they're going to completely believe it. And that is hard to counter. Those ideas are really hard to counter, which is where leadership is really important. So, for example, you know, I spend a lot of time promoting people from all political parties that are veterans. I've helped Labour politicians get elected, giving them counsel and advice. I've spoken at Labour conference, Conservative conference. I've spoken with Lib Dems, worked with them, and now we've had Reform. Recently set up a Veterans for Reform. They did a big launch at the same time they announced Suella Braverman as their latest coup and scalp. And I listened to all 28 minutes of that announcement, and I was really depressed. And it wasn't because it was Reform. It was because the narrative perpetuated veterans as victims, as downtrodden, as just men as well. I didn't mention female once. And it was wholly depressing. And I thought, God, you know, people in my community here that own businesses, if you were to listen to that, you'd be like, do you know what? I'm going to give that a steer. I'm not going to hire a veteran. They're going to be a right nightmare. Because there was this perpetual, downtrodden, negative rubbishing of veterans. Rather than talking us up. The reality is, even people like me, on paper, I'm an absolute basket case. I'm like a triple threat of a broken veteran, you know, in their narrative. But I refuse to be a victim. I'm valued. And actually, everything that's happened to me definitely made me a better person. Not that I wish it happened, because it was bloody horrible. No, but it did. You accept that and you move on. You can't change the past. I'm definitely a better person now. So yeah, it's that leads into the point around the narrative. So I always ask, who, if you look at some of these narratives, who's to gain? Are we to gain as the British people collectively, or are our adversaries to gain? And I always go back to that point. You look at it and go, yeah, who's going to gain? Oh, adversaries going to gain on that. So don't feed into it. And it's so hard because the difference between truth, reality, and lies is so blurred. It's a real challenge.
So you started a charity, the Afghan Veterans Community. Obviously, you've done that because you were serving Afghan. But why did you do it? Why did you feel the need to do that charity or to form that charity? Wasn't there enough out there already?
Goes back to that book. So when Not Pitting happened and the withdrawal from Afghanistan, I felt ashamed. And at the same time, the Falklands generation that inspired us to serve, as I mentioned, they were celebrating their anniversary, 40-year anniversary of the Falklands. You know, they were very proud. And you saw the way, no matter if they were Matlows or Paras or Marines, when they put their scarves on, of the South Atlantic Medal ribbon scarves, they give each other a little nod in the street. There's a real unified community of those that served down south. So I think about 30,000 served down south in the Falklands. Only 40 were women. But there was a real collegiate sense amongst those veterans, and pride, real pride. And I saw we didn't have that. And I saw many of it, and we're still working age. The nature of our withdrawal, not our fault. That's the politicians. And I saw a lot of my friends feeling really quite downtrodden and ashamed. And I thought, that's not right. So as we asked around, another person, a friend of mine from a large friendship group, still serving, Matt Mallet, he was feeling the same as well, because he'd heard it. So we started to go and do some research, spoke to a lot of people, spoke to Johnny Mercer, who's a mate from when he was Veterans Minister, spoke to Dan Jarvis on the Labour benches, a former parachute regiment officer, spoke to got in front of presidents, past presidents of the RBL, charity heads, and just went for a lot of coffees. And they all gave us the same advice, which was don't duplicate something that's already out there. So our aim was always to make a community, not to deliver service provision to beneficiaries, but actually just bring people together again with a shared experience. And we knew we needed data. So one of those conversations with the CEO of M&C Saatchi World Services, so many listeners would have heard of Saatchi as a big insights analysis PR agency from the past, and for the future, they're absolutely world class. Simon and his team offered us a team to do some analysis. So we did 6 focus groups, and every single veteran was paid, because I personally went around the WhatsApp and asked people to chip in to make sure we value our veterans and pay them for their time. And also we did a survey. 1,600 people responded to that survey. It's the largest independent survey ever conducted into Afghan veterans. And going back to why was I feeling that? Guess what? Everyone was feeling it too. 92% of those who filled in the survey said that they fear Afghanistan would be forgotten. And for me, that was what I was fearing too. So we knew we needed to commemorate Afghanistan. That's what they told us. So now, on the 26th of October, the closest Sunday to that, which marks the withdrawal from Camp Bastion, we remember Afghanistan at the National Memorial Arboretum. RBL led the first service because it was on the 10-year anniversary. We led last year's service, and we'll do it now for the next 80 years. Cenotaph. 75% of us marched past the cenotaph this year, and up more than our first year. All wearing our desert shamags, a bit like the South Atlantic Medal Association with their unifying scarves. We've got our desert shamags. And 25% of those were women. So women are coming out of the woodwork. People are reconciling and becoming at peace with their veteran identity as a result of us talking about it And we're talking about it as you got to look back and share the stories, but we're looking forward as a working age population and talk about everything that we positive and how that contributes to society. So we're essentially a community, a bit like the South Atlantic Medal Association, a bit like the Normandy Veterans Association, that was started for the same reasons. And now we're offering other stuff like mental health awareness so we can look after each other in conversations, and looking at projects of sending our veterans into schools to talk about Afghanistan so it won't be remembered, and to talk about our skills. It's an 80-year project and we're just at the start of it.
Wow. I wish you all the best with it. I really do. The worry of things being forgotten. I was really annoyed when I was talking to some people I know, lads at work and stuff like that. And I spoke of Bosnia, and they hadn't got a clue. Didn't know nothing about it. It was before they were born, really. Kosovo, they didn't know nothing about Kosovo. They don't really know anything about, the troubles in Northern Ireland and stuff like that. They didn't really know that much about Iraq or Afghanistan because they're the civvies. But it was the Bosnia thing that got me. This was on our doorstep. It was genocide. It was, it was the civil war on our doorstep. And they hadn't got a clue about it. They didn't know nothing about it whatsoever. Stuff like that should be taught in schools.
Yep.
We need to know the history so we don't repeat it, as the old saying says.
Yeah.
It begged, I couldn't get over that. And it really, really annoyed me for quite a while. That something like that can be just forgotten about. On the plus side, on the other hand, I've seen it as how can I put this? I've seen it as a good thing as well. That people aren't infatuated by troubles and war and things like that. But you can't just forget about it. It's got to be, I'm not saying ram it in people's faces, but like you say, you can't forget about it. It's got to be there. We've got to teach stuff like this at school.
Even more so today, because everything's going on in the world at the moment. There's absolutely no way. I've got another one on the way, another child on the way this summer. Do I want my children to go to conflict, particularly the nature of conflict as we're looking at now? Absolutely not. So those decision makers, those future leaders, are in schools now. So if we can go and talk about war and conflict, including some of the positive contributions of serving in the armed forces, then I believe it's less likely the future decision makers will send us to war. You only have to look at some of the veteran politicians in Parliament. They're more likely to be considered and have debate rather than simply going, yeah, let's go. They're not gung-ho because they've seen it. They know the impact. And that is why this is important. That's why we need to talk about it. When I grew up, I remember a Battle of Britain pilot coming into school in primary school. I remember talking to Peggy, who ran the sweet shop next door to my house, about her stories of seeing pilots bailing out of aircraft in the Kent countryside, and bombers crashing in the fields where I was playing in my town that I was living in. So that's how I learnt about, from first-hand accounts from those eyewitnesses. And before it's too late, before we're too old, it's really important that we share that now, which is brilliant why we've got podcasts now. We didn't have that back then. So there's more on record. And indeed, I helped the Imperial War Museum spread their archive message to our community. So we've seen veterans sharing their story with museums forevermore. A good friend of mine, Martin, runs Legacy, which is an education charity that records the stories of veterans for future generations. So it's really important we capture these stories. It's really important we go and look in the eye and answer questions for these kids. So if they are slightly glorified because they've been on Call of Duty too much, that we can actually say to them, it's really not cool. You can't respawn, right? You can't respawn. My friends, when they got shot or killed by an IED, there's no respawn in there. They're dead. So it's really important to have those responsible conversations, and then hopefully, just hopefully, we're less likely to go into conflict in the first place.
Yeah, you're right. It's not all about recruitment. Recruiting would be nice to, but then again, we have to have an armed forces for them to go into. It's getting smaller and smaller, and especially with what could be just around the corner. It's fucking fingers crossed it doesn't, but I can. Well, we don't.
It's scary.
Yeah, it is pretty scary, to be honest. I mean, I grew up, you'll be aware of it as well, the fear of the Cold War, the fear of the bomb coming over. And I look back on that time, and we did have a fear of that. We did have a fear of nuclear attack. There genuinely was one. People didn't run around the streets doing it. They're talking about it, but we definitely had a fear. We still had the old observation corps.
Yeah.
About stuff like that. Are we going to be in that situation now where we're going to be worried about drones coming in and hitting the country? And God knows. It's. I think somebody asked me, "Do you think Iran will hit London?" It's a fucking good drone if it does, but it's not impossible. And there's more than one country out there that could have the ability to drop something on England. But let's not end on that sad note.
No.
Woe is me type of thing. Woe betide. Never mind woe is me, woe betide. Don't panic, Mr. Mannering, and all that. I mean, what's your plans for the future then?
For me,
apart from having another baby very soon, you're going to be tiny.
Yeah, I'm super excited. Well, that's it. Family's my future. They are my future. It's the reason I do everything I do. I'm excited now to be doing more speaking. I'm just being onboarded for a speaker agency. It's going to talk more within corporate environments about some of the things that I've learned on operations, some of those stories and some of the lessons that I've learned in different areas that are applicable within the corporate environment, having done a lot of public speaking over the years. So that's exciting. That's a new thing, being signed for an agency. But doing more veterans affairs consultancy within organisations, with my family business, the Great Campaigns Company, that my wife and I run. So working more with other charities so they can avoid mistakes, because I've made some mistakes in the past, but I've certainly done things the right way. And I've mentioned the research that we did before we set up a charity. We did our homework. So it's all intelligence led in what we do. So when we have conversations, we refer back to our research and our report that's available on the UK Afghanistan Veterans Community's website. Anyone can see it. So advising other charities about how to do it right, around governance, how to get good trustees. Half our board are women, as an example. So these are the kind of things I want to share with other organisations, which I do as a consultant through my business. But really, for me, the future is family. The future is Fizz. I live in a wonderful part of the world here in Leicestershire. I'm looking at doing some more challenges. Obviously, the Invictus has gone. I'm an ambassador for Invictus 2027 on behalf of the Games, the nation. So I'll continue to advocate for the Games. But I think for me, I am looking for my next challenge, an endurance challenge. I did one last year with one of my Invictus mates, which was 118 kilometres over 3 days and a combination of rowing and running. So I'm looking at my next challenge. So yeah, watch this space on that one because I've not quite worked it out. So I'll continue to be curious.
Be curious. That's always a good explanation. It's always a good way to be. It really is. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it. Sorry, I can't put my teeth in there. Honestly, thanks for coming on. Really enjoyed it. There's loads of questions I want to ask you, but I couldn't really. Otherwise, we'd have been here for hours. And I know you're a busy man, and it's getting on. So I'll just say good night from me. Thanks for coming on. Really enjoyed it.
Cheers, pal. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for telling our stories.